I'm Pete Fishman. I go by Fish. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mozart Data. Uh, Hello, right back at you, Santiago. So today, of course, we're going to be talking, like the title suggested, about buying versus building versus outsourcing your data stack. So as I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Mozart Data. And there, I've talked to a lot of companies that are setting up their data stacks for the for a first time. And they think about a lot of things in that decision. And I wanted to bring on a few folks that have thought about that, in addition, beyond myself. And I'm excited essentially to welcome them to this webinar, and we hope that you find it useful. Now, the market for data tools is, a crowded space. There are many to choose from, so there's a lot to think about. So I think that their perspective, having gone through it a variety of different times, is going to sort of add to that conversation. Like anything, we want it to be a conversation, so please add questions, and we'll have an explicit section for Q&A at the end, though kind of if you add your questions as things are popping up, we'll sort of make mental notes, and then essentially, hopefully, it'll add to the discussion. So first off, let me start by introducing our panelists. So we have Jessica Larson. So Jess is from outside of Seattle and now lives in Oakland. She studied cognitive science and computer science at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. Jessica's passionate about helping women and non-binary people find their place in technology. She was the first engineer within the enterprise data warehouse team at Pinterest, and she helps develop fantastic women through Built by Girls. Previously, she wrangled data at both Ease and Flexport, and outside of work, she enjoys the California sun and playing volleyball. One thing missing from her credentials is she is an up-and-coming published author. She's the author of Snowflake Access Control, which you can now pre-order. And then joining Jessica on the panel, we have Mike Owe. Mike is the SVP of Product and GM at Cloud9 Esports. He's responsible for new product development, technology, and analytics. Previously, he was VP of Growth at FunPlus, a top mobile social game developer. And prior to that, he's worked at Signia Ventures as an EIR, and he co-founded the mobile gaming company Red Robot Labs. Mike is an avid gamer and an avid fantasy sports player. He's gotten the best of me a number of times there. So again, we'll save some time at the end for audience questions. Please submit via the Q&A button. And we'll also, no need to necessarily take notes. We will send out a recording of this tomorrow. So with that, let's dive in. So to start off, please let me know, have you bought, built, or outsourced your data stack? So let's start by turning this over to Jess.
So in my experience, I've actually done all three of these. Starting off at Flexport, we had a pretty large data engineering team, and so we pretty much built everything. More recently, at Pinterest, we've kind of played around with getting some tools to do some of this for us, and also done the outsourcing component as well.
And Mike, how about yourself?
Yeah, we've, Mike. Yeah, so through my career, I've done a little of both. At Red Robot Labs, we built from the ground up. A lot of the cloud infrastructure tools that existed weren't around. FunPlus was also built from the ground up. And at Cloud9, we've done a little bit of both, and have kind of pivoted more into existing tools like Mozart.
Sweet. Well, I think it's sort of like a false title. The title is to, essentially start the conversation, the sort of buy versus build versus outsource. And that's not really how companies experience it. There's never like a distinct moment where we're like, well, we're definitely buying this exact solution with no other possible like things touching our data. And there's never a, well, we're only just, hiring this engineer and then building everything from scratch. And, sort of, can you speak to a little bit of, what, you both had mentioned at different times there have been one more dominant, answer, buy versus build, but can you talk about a little bit of the sort of how it happens in reality? How does that decision come about in reality? So maybe Jess, you could lead us there first.
Yeah. So, when you find yourself in this position where you're like, okay, crap, like we have this problem we need to solve. So how do we solve it? And it kind of depends on your organization, whether you're an organization that typically leads towards buy or leans towards builds. There's a whole lot of factors at play. But that's kind of like one of the first things I think of, is, what is your organization kind of set up for? And then I start to think about like, are you the existing things that you have in your stack? Are you kind of using those in the typical manner? Do you have this set up in a way that isn't how everybody else is using it? That kind of starts to inform whether it makes more sense to buy or build.
You hit on something that I think is really important, which is, core competencies and like where are the strengths in your organization. Now, unsurprisingly, you probably very much selected to join very technical teams at very technical companies because that's where you wanted to work and learn and grow and all the things. Maybe Mike, you could tell me a little bit about kind of some of the core competencies in some of the organizations, obviously a very heavy gaming background. Where do you see, those competencies and how does that play in and interact with data?
Yeah, so, starting out in free-to-play games, working with you at Playdom and then Red Robot, and also Fun Plus, super data-driven, as you know. And I think a lot of the decisions when deciding whether to build or buy or partner is core competency, for sure, speed and size of the organization as well. So for instance, at Cloud9, we are an esports team, so we're mainly driven by our teams, so League of Legends, Valorant, etc. And we operate very much like a pro sports team. So at our core competency, analytics is not one of them. We are also not a very engineering heavy team. So I think those two factors really made a decision for us. We do partner with Microsoft and we work a ton with Power BI for visualizations. But as far as data pipelining, it made a lot of sense to partner rather than kind of build something from the ground up. Now, back in the day, before cloud was a big deal for analytics and data, all that stuff had to be built from the ground up, 10 years ago when we were together.
Yeah, actually, I had a lot of sway and say in essentially some of that tooling from, sadly, it's more than a decade ago, but we don't have to go back in time. I think, you mentioned, speed and size being other really key determinants, existing team, what kind of data it is probably also kind of plays a role. You mentioned some of the technologies you're using. By the way, one of the things I'm a little bit remiss in saying is I didn't really give an intro to what either Pinterest or Cloud9 is. I assume the audience, is familiar with both of those things, but one, in giving the next answer about the types of data you work with, Jess, maybe you could explain what Pinterest is for those who are unaware. And then Mike, thanks for the quick brief on Cloud9.
Yeah, so Pinterest, we are an inspiration platform. We're basically a bulletin board for ideas, where you can, create an entire section for renovating your kitchen and explore Pinterest for inspiration for doing that and organizing it all together so that you can reference that when it's actually time to like get that done. And so on my side of things, the kind of data I'm working with is actually not product data. I'm working with the enterprise data. So stuff for our sales teams and stuff from HR and finance and things like that.
Great. And, obviously that has its own separate set of implications. I guess, how does that inform the sort of buy, build, consultant decision? Because, obviously these are data that are, one, high value data, and two, sensitive and privacy concerned data. How do you think about it? And, I'll start going back to Jessica, but I'm sure, Mike, you have some of these issues as well.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, right? It is extremely sensitive data for many, many different reasons, right? We're a public company, so our financials are very, very sensitive, not during reporting periods. And so, yeah, the number one thing that we're thinking about when we think about buy, build, outsource is security. How do we make it so that this super, super sensitive data isn't exposed to any additional eyes at any point during the extraction from the source through to the data warehouse and all the way through to any final downstream tools.
And Mike, how does that play into your sort of buy, build decision thinking?
Yeah, also super important for us. So we also have consumer data. So we're running some live products. We also have a lot of business analytics as well, just to run the business. I like to call them RTB, run the business analytics. And then on the really super secret side, we've got competitive data. So we are a competitive esports organization, and we are playing against other orgs, and lots of money on the line as well. So very much like pro sports, we have our own kind of in-game game analytics system. So we're looking at games we've had, as well as scrim data, which is scrimmages. It's within our own org. So super confidential, and security is super important for that as well, all the way up and down the stack.
So does that necessitate a build strategy? So it might necessitate some internal expertise, but does it necessitate build? Does it necessitate a consultant that you bring in with an external title, but has your own sort of email? How do you think about that? And I'll go to Mike first.
I think it does. It does. We really look for people who have been in working with esports data, for example, for the game side. So we do have an analytics team that's devoted specifically to that. We also have an analytics team that's working on business data as well. So some of them are full-time, so they work here. Others are partners, and I think it does necessitate having a very close relationship with our vendors, such as Mozart, and also high level of trust. So I think we're there with you guys. I also think in the age of cloud computing, that it's pretty normalized not to have your physical servers under lock and key, like back in the day. So I think in that regard, that's obviously pretty normal for people to have cloud computing instances all over the place. So that in that regard, not as heavily, but I think that's just industry standard at this point.
So I think we've hit on a lot of sort of the key initial thinking points around expertise, security, the types of data that you're thinking about, sort of the challenges with your data that you're trying to solve. There is, obviously one more very, very, very important decision, and I as an economist love talking about this. Dollars, budget. So I'd love to hear kind of the trade-offs and evaluation between sort of a buy, build, outsource, and then last, in thinking about this question, I think again the title of this webinar is a little bit disingenuous because it's missing a fourth option, which is to punt, to actually delay setting up your data. So first, let's dive into budgets. How do you think about them? How do you get them? How do you deploy them? How do you do mental accounting of these different solutions for it? So maybe why don't we go to Jessica first? So Jessica, how do you think about the B word, budgets, in this context?
Again, first, I think it goes back to how your organization works. At Pinterest, it seems like we have a little bit more of a budget for tooling than we might have for staffing. And so that kind of informs our decision kind of a lot, because that money isn't necessarily available to us for headcount. So it makes that like a pretty easy decision. But I think often a lot of these tools are going to, in the long run, be cheaper than headcount, especially as we see engineers are not cheap these days, right? And it kind of seems like it's a total compensation arms race right now, especially as we see like this, engineering shortage and all of that. And so then, thinking about contracting, that does tend to be a cheaper way to go. But that is also its whole own can of worms of like, how do you find the right project that can be given to a group of contractors that, could leave at any time, more so than an employee might. And you might have a little bit less control over that whole process when you do that.
I think that makes sense. So if you think about kind of the spend, the most expensive is hiring internal. Like the second choice, even though on a per hour basis tends to be the highest, is consulting. And then the cheapest tends to be buying sort of an existing solution. When I think about those, the trade-off, kind of like you mentioned, is control. Mike, how have you thought about kind of that sort of budget versus control dance?
I think, yeah. So talking about budget, I think it really goes back to core competency. Like, what kind of company are you, and what are you trying to build? What is the product you're building? So for us, again, we're a competitive esports organization. We're not an analytics company, nor are we, a data tooling company. So for our case, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to go out and hire a bunch of developers and engineers. I think the other thing now, even if we were, I think hiring a large team has a ton of overhead. All the things that were mentioned, as well as recruiting and then retention, and then there's just a lot of overhead with hiring people full time, period. And I think for us in the past, I think in free to play, data was a huge part of it. Having free to play games, that is, and having large data sets. So it made sense to hire an engineering team. And in my case right now, it doesn't. So we're really looking for people and companies who do this all 100% of the time. Like Mozart, for instance, all you guys do is analytics. I think that's great for us because we're getting kind of best in breed, best in class engineering, people who do this 24 hours a day, rather than us trying to A, figure it out for ourselves, and B, split our time between what is our core competency of being a professional esports org.
Yeah, I think that is like a false, just one-dimensional trade-off or two-dimensional trade-off that I've set up between like essentially control and dollars. I think like kind of like you mentioned, it's sometimes a lot easier for a team that's focused on a singular mission of building tooling, like us at Mozart in the data space, a deep expertise on data stacks. Whereas Cloud9 can be great at many things, but not everything. And if that is not your core competency, that might not be the dimension that you want to necessarily compete on. So I don't think it's just simply two-dimensional. And that's definitely one of the key trade-offs in thinking it. Like one is also a specific expertise or a deep domain expertise. I do think it's worth having the conversation of when to punt this decision. So we set it up as, you're a startup, you've made the mental decision of we want to invest in data. You've both worked at startups that have made that decision, or you yourself have made that decision. I want to know, when do you think about just punting it? Like, look, like we've got a lot of other things, we've got, something that's mission critical to us now, and data, it'll help us, but it'll help us eventually. How do you think about, Jessica, is it necessary and critical for a company to have a data stack? If you're a startup, when should you punt it? When should you start researching all of these different options? How do you think about that problem?
Well, hopefully you get the data stack before people start having Excel files live on their local machines. But all jokes aside, no, I think it's really one of those where when do you have problems that you need to solve with data, where you have a volume of data that you cannot just kind of look at and try to find trends yourself, or when you have enough data where it's no longer this too small of a sample size to start to draw conclusions from, where you can actually start to do statistical analysis on it, that kind of thing. But I think if you're at a point where your business is running well and you don't have these huge questions of like, how do I know if a customer is still my customer, and things like that, it might make sense to punt it down the road a little bit until you have a point where you're like, I need this.
I think it's a little bit of a lie for me to say there's just like a moment in time where a key turns on, and then now you're like, well, now I really need to start analyzing my data. I think it looks more kind of like you implied, where you start like kind of like saving these like really like incredible Excel files that are like joining across many like different sort of sources that are all copied and pasted from all different places. And then eventually you say, you know what, like we've got to get this underhand. The sort of story that it's told in sort of backwards looking, or like from someone like me, is like, well, you had this commitment and you said, okay, now I want to really get serious about my data, and then I just like started doing it right from the start. And that's really never how it actually goes at companies. But everybody sort of has that wish that you're describing, like, I wish we didn't do it the wrong way at first, but like that's just part of the process. I mean, that's true of anything. Mike, you've made some decisions. You've literally been the decider at many companies about when to really start to invest in that data stack. And it has evolved over time. How does that look from your perspective?
I think it really, stage and company really matters. So I've started a couple companies from day zero, and certainly when you're pre-product, pre-launch, you don't need a big data stack, right? You should be focused on your product. And similarly, when you're even after your launch, or maybe you're doing a beta or an alpha, most of the really key metrics that you need can be done, in Excel or Google Docs when you're just trying to start up. I think it's really important to know what your key metrics are. Like, what are you managing your product or your business to? And that doesn't necessarily, to have a good understanding of data doesn't mean you have to have a data stack. So I think those are two different things. But I think it's important to have a really good understanding from a business point of view and product point of view from day zero of what your goals are and how you're managing your business and your product to those goals. Now, whether you need a data stack to do that, I think that's more of an open-ended question. I found in the past that I didn't in the very beginning, and I think having a really intact data stack to handle a big audience is something that you will probably find you need when you're sure you have product market fit, and you're getting users, and it's important to have that before you get a big influx of users, so you can keep those users and not be a kind of a leaky bucket. But I think the other thing which is really important when you're kind of figuring out where to invest your money and your time and your people is constantly doing the if you had $1 or $100, whatever that exercise is, where would you put that $100? I mean, we used to, when you have a finite amount of life, which is your funding and your runway as a startup, you have to be really cognizant of where you're putting that money. So we used to do that exercise at Red Robot basically every quarter, and we would just continually figure out where we needed to invest. And if something was going well, we'd double down, or if something wasn't, we cut it. But I think it's in an early stage, you have to be really nimble and really, really keep your eye on the dollars. In summary, it depends on where you're at, where the product's at, where the team's at, how much money you have in the bank. I think those are all things to be top of mind.
I love that Jessica's answer was all about the output, like the Excel file gone wrong, and that Mike's answer was about sort of the product progress and the essentially the state of the company. So I think like actually that those are two very valuable perspectives, and I think kind of that when to punt is still like one of the core questions for early stage companies. They know that data is important, but when is that sort of magic moment of I really need to start taking this seriously is still an open question. And it can be from the perspective of what's the state of the business, from the perspective of what's the state of sort of things going awry from a technical perspective and creating technical debt. So
when you run out of
anyway,
rows in Excel, that's when you need a day stack.
Okay. That happens for different companies at different times. I mean, some tables that are so basic end up being just a few rows, and that could be for forever until that changes. So any other, I do want to sort of move to audience questions in just a few minutes, but sort of let's just talk about things that you think are maybe really important in terms of like using data effectively at an early, like at the early stages. So once you've actually made that buy, build, consult decision, what are you looking to get from it? What are key, what's success look like? Jess?
Oof. All right. Yeah, it's a really good question. What does success look like? I think the first thing, I guess, not what does success look like, but how do you be successful is having clear questions and always coming with not coming with a solution, coming with a problem. I know I see a lot of that in data. Like when I was a data analyst, people would come to me with solutions that they wanted me to build. And, that's not, as an analyst, that's not actually what you're trying to do. You're trying, come to me with a question, come to me with a problem, and I will try to find out a solution for that problem. So I think that's, I guess, one thing. As far as like measuring success though, I think if you have, how does the business view the data team, right? How do they view the insights that the data team's coming up with, or that's coming out of that tool? In a lot of organizations, like for example, Flexport, I think Flexport had a really, really successful, great data organization. The relationship between the data org and the rest of the company was extremely strong. We basically couldn't keep up with the number of requests that we were getting because there was just such an appetite for data. But I think that was a really healthy ecosystem.
Sweet. And Mike, how would you think about success?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually, because I think there's a variety of different ways to be successful with data. I think one of the issues that I've seen come up, and this is just a couple examples. For instance, everyone thinks that they need real-time data. Like they want real-time data. But the real answer is that the reason that you have the data is to make business decisions, right? And unless you're equipped to make a business decision in a change in real time, you don't really need real-time data, right? Because in gaming, for instance, real-time data is great, but at the same time, to fix whatever issue you're having or to come up with a solution, you got to look at the data, do the analysis, and then come up with a feature or a fix, right? And then you have to code that feature or fix, QA it, and then push it. Does that happen in real time? No. So why would you need to know it in real time? You like 24 hours is probably fine. So or some hourly. So I think that's and that leads you to like what is data? Data is just data unless it helps you make decisions. I think what you really want is insights, right? So there's a big difference between data and insights, and I think insights allow you to help run the business, optimize the business, For instance, how do you decrease churn on your user base, or how do you increase day one retention? These are very typical use cases for data that a gaming startup, free to play startup, or an app company would use. And without having that data, it's really hard to kind of dissect and get through that problem. So I think having insights, that's like success for me, like being able to have actionable data that the business or the product team can use to make better outcomes for their business or product, right? That's number one. Now, number two is just usage. I remember, there's a couple data tooling and orgs that I've built that we really wanted to make sure that people were using the tools, because the tooling is only as effective in a non kind of data org as people will use them, right? It's like if Mozart builds a connector and no one uses it, what's the point of building it? So for us, we used to always measure, queries per team, TAU per team, like who's actually using these tools, and then even going a step further, who's actually using the tools to make decisions. So I think the data to decision making and helping get better outcomes, that's success for me, that I've seen work really well, and can be hard to get there as well. There's certainly a ton of teams that are not data driven. So at a very kind of high level cultural level, it's really trying to push your whole culture and org into a kind of a more data driven, quant driven kind of org, and that can be really difficult, especially if that's not where the company's coming from. So adoption, usage, insights, outcomes. I think those are the headlines for me.
Great. We're gonna open it up to questions, but sort of piggybacking on some stuff that Mike and Jess said, especially Mike. Mike, I didn't do this in the intro, but Mike has hired some of the best people in the data space, has sort of found them, as sort of grown their careers. So he, when we talk about data being effective within an organization, that wasn't really the full theme of this one. I wanted to focus this webinar on just buy versus build versus consult, but really I think sort of making data successful early on, and what is the output. Obviously you have a lot of experience there, and you have to be thinking about the next step when you're thinking about that buy versus build decision. And so thanks for some of the thoughts there. I want to open it up to some questions that we have. And one is around it's about sort of working, and feel free to add to the Q&A, anybody in the audience, but one is about working with consultants to set up a data stack, and how do you evaluate consultants to do that. I would also ask, you can broaden that question, whether that's a consultant or whether that's a sort of a buy tool. How do you evaluate, and it sort of piggybacks off of the last question, how do you evaluate that consultant? How do you evaluate that tool, whether it is effective? Mike, you've mentioned, whether analytics is effective within your org. How do you evaluate just literally the sort of buy versus consult once you've made that decision?
I think it's a lot easier now than it used to be. People, I think the nice part about hiring engineers, and I think people in general, is people have a live portfolio of their work. So it's very easy to see people's work and talk to them about their work. I think in the past it was, you're up on a whiteboard, you're writing code or queries in an interview. But now I think it's, here's my work, here's what I've done, here's my portfolio. So I really take that approach now, since people, usually have a bunch of side projects or work that they've published. So it's very easy to evaluate kind of what they worked on, the depth of their knowledge, and then just talk to them about their experience. Obviously, experience on your stack is super, super important. You wouldn't hire someone who's just hasn't worked on your stack before. Unless they're the most brilliant person ever and could just pick it up. So usually you want some familiarity with the technology you're using, and then just their work. I think it's putting the work in and seeing the work is super important from my point of view.
Jess, rather than you answering the same question, I'd love to hear sort of almost the sort of build side. How do you know if a data team is good? How do you know if you've made a good decision there? How would you evaluate your engineer and their capabilities and their likelihood of driving an outcome to success, especially early on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one trap that a lot of engineers fall into that you kind of want to avoid is engineering for engineering's sake. And I think, for example, Mike touched on the real-time data. I think one of the big reasons that a lot of times we reach for real-time data is it's super fun and exciting to build out. Building out PubSub, it's fun. It's a lot more fun than building out batch processing, right? And so when you are evaluating your data team, are they doing things just because it's really fun, right? Is that the best business decision? Now, on the other side, I think a lot of really good engineers who are really intellectually curious and really driven by all of that, who are probably great engineers, might also want to go and do the fun, exciting, cool things for the sake of fun, exciting, cool things. But just kind of thinking about like, how does your data team think about engineering problems? And how do they think about it in context of a business? Are they thinking about this is cool and fun, or are they thinking about this is how I solve this business problem, right? I'm going to have a lot more faith in the team that is going to solve the problem rather than engineering for engineering's sake.
I love that you describe data infrastructure as fun. I know I got the right panelists in that respect. So with that, actually, I think it's a great note for me to thank you both for joining us here, for answering my questions, to set up that conversation of buy versus build. Let me just take a moment to say, if you're still on the fence about your buy, build data stack decision, we love to talk to you at Mozart Data. We are the easiest way to set up a modern data stack. And we'd also love to just share with you some of our insights from working with customers. We have a variety of customer stories. You can go to mozartdata.com/case studies. Up there, you can find our work with Modern Treasury, who needed to set up a data stack, but they wanted to hold off on hiring their first data engineer. So they were able to leverage Mozart's out-of-the-box data solution, and they were able to set up their data stack incredibly fast without needing that sort of data engineering resource. And also, again, if you're just interested in learning more, we have lots of educational material on our website, or you can contact us directly at sales@mozartdata.com. We'll send out the recording of Jess and Mike's answers tomorrow. And again, thank you so much for attending and your questions, and have a great day. Thanks.